My topic is about utility of ultrasonic tools for safe and effective bone resection in cervical biportal endoscopy, posterior foraminectomy and discectomy. Cervical pathologies and the use of UBE for the treatment of cervical pathologies has been documented with a significant reduced blood loss, shorter operative times, lower rates of dural tears and neural injury. Standard instrumentation included the upcutters along with the power drills. But what are the instruments has been used for the bone window creation? Its key point is about the precision and safety. The new tool is ultrasonic bone scalpel. It has a tissue selective cuts which cuts the hard bones. It has a precise and controlled bone removal, reduced thermal spread and minimal vibration, and enhanced safety and visibility. It generates the vibrations with variable frequencies. There are series of inserts in different forms, shapes and curvatures to reach the different corners. It is coupled with a peristaltic pump with continuous irrigation that can also help in removing the debris. Ultrasound bone scalpel in unilateral biportal endoscopy has been documented, but most of the studies are in the lumbar stenosis or it's used in the anterior discectomy and fusion. In this, we are showing the use of ultrasound bone scalpel in waterpedium during cervical UB. The surgical steps is regarding position of the patient and OR setup and making portals, confirmation under the CM. The key of this surgery is to have a clear viewpoint which has upper borders of upper lamina, lower lamina with the facet at the junction and exposing the ligament of femur, clearing all the soft tissues. Once we have achieved the clear visualization of the viewpoint, then we start the bony preparation. Here in this presentation, we have used two scalpels, which is like a cup curate and which is a trapezoid bone cutter, which we have used to remove the superior lamina to create the bone window along with the inferior lamina and to widen to decompress the roots. Here you can see safe and precise cuttings of the bone, which is scraping of the bone as if the ice cream is scooped or cheese is scooped with the hot thing and with a clear visual field. Using this trapezoid blade, we can cut the bone into small pieces, and with the scooper, that cup curate, we are scooping out the bone from the edges along the medial pedicle plastic. Extension of the bony window. This is the one of the blade with angle, and it acts like a cup curate. And to finish with, the root is probed for the enough of decompression with, and disc retrieval has been done. After the surgery, the disc fragments that has been removed and the surgical wound. The comparison of this scalpel with the power drills, you can see the distortion of the field with the power drills, which is more, and minimal with the use of the ultrasound bone scalpels. And the other advantage is the safety of the adjacent neural structures and damage to the soft tissues in the nearby is less with this ultrasonic bone scalpel compared to the power drills. In conclusion, the ultrasonic bone cutter is a transformative tool. It has superior visual clarity, reduced complications, and faster recovery compared to the high-speed bursts. Its precision and safety make it particularly valuable for endoscopic procedures, especially in UB and in cervical spine. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Prithvi. Let me call upon Dr. Laksh Agarwal for his paper.
K-line tilt as a predictor of postoperative kyphotic deformity after laminectomy and its correlation with the clinical outcomes. The standard cervical sagittal parameters include a C2, C7 SVA, a K-line, the K-line tilt, cervical lordosis, and C7 slope for ease of calculation. Traditionally, C2, C7 SVA has been the workhorse of cervical spine sagittal alignment. K-line tilt is a new parameter, angular parameter, which calculates the angle between the K-line and a perpendicular drawn to the floor, and it has shown to have strong correlation with the C2, C7 SVA. K-line tilt previously has been used for predicting kyphotic deformity post-laminoplasty and multi-level ACDF and ACCF, but has never been used for laminectomy cases. The aim of the study was to see if K-line tilt can be used as an effective predictor of kyphotic deformity, to come out with a cutoff angle for K-line tilt and correlation of the radiological and clinical outcomes after laminectomy. This was a single center retrospective observational analysis of 70 cases with a minimum 2-year follow-up. Cervical laminectomy for all cases of spondylotic myelopathy without implantation, where the patients had functional motor power, K-line positive, cervical lordosis of greater than or equal to 0, and C7 inferior end plate visible on the lateral radiograph for the inclusion criteria. In the outcome measures, the recovery of JOA score was calculated using the Hirabayashi method. In postoperative, the groups were divided into 2 groups, ones that had kyphotic deformity present and ones who did not have kyphotic deformity. In the kyphotic deformity present group, the K-line tilt, SVA and C7 slope, where the K-line tilt was 21 degrees and developed a significant kyphosis, where it went from 13.4 degrees of lordosis to 16.6 degrees of kyphosis. In the kyphotic deformity negative group, the K-line tilt was was 8 degrees, which progressed to 9. The second patient showing K-line tilt of 10.4 degrees, progression to 16. And third showing 15.7 K-line tilt, progression reduction to 12.8. This was a patient who showed kyphotic deformity after laminectomy, but was excluded as C7 inferior end plate was not visible on the lateral radiographs. The mean age of the patients included in the study was 66.5 with a male predominance. Out of the cases, spondylotic myelopathy was 67% and OPLL was 33%. Most of the patients were operated with C3 to C6 laminectomy, and second majority having C3 to C7 laminectomy. 8 patients developed kyphotic deformity postoperatively, whereas 62 patients had kyphotic deformity negative. The K-line tilt, SVA, and C7 slope had statistical significance where the kyphot and recovery of JOA scores was present in both groups of patients, but the recovery rate and the scores of JOA were much better in the patients without kyphotic deformity as compared to those who developed kyphotic deformity. There was also a very strong correlation, linear correlation between K-line tilt and C7 slope, and also between preoperative K-line tilt and C2, C7 SVA, along with postoperative K-line tilt and C2, C7 SVA. In conclusion, K-line tilt is a reliable predictor of postoperative kyphotic deformity in our set of cases. We came up with a cutoff angle of 21 degrees in this set of cases, where a K-line tilt of 21 degrees in patients with K-line positive or lack of cervical kyphosis should also be supplemented with a fusion procedure, either anterior or posterior, to prevent deformity after surgery. Since sagittal vertical axis is a measure of in millimeters, this is influenced by the magnification of the X-rays and requires calibration, whereas K-line tilt is an angular parameter and does not require any calibration, so can be measured for any of those groups of patients. These are my references. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Laksh. Let me call upon Dr. Shubham Kadam for his paper.
Good evening, everyone. Control trial. We all know what are the causes of the cervical myelopathy and its global burden. so I'll not go into the details of it. There are various literature on the spine and the mean arterial pressure, like after a thoracolumbar trauma, to maintain the mean arterial pressure more than 85 millimeters of mercury to improve the neurological outcome. Also, another article showing like to raising the mean arterial pressure alone restores the 20% of the intraoperative neuromonitoring losses. So why is this MAP is important? The mean arterial pressure, it is the average blood pressure in a person during one complete cardiac cycle. It is calculated by this formula, and it is a crucial indicator of how well the blood is circulating in and perfusing the vital organs. There are various research on the cervical myelopathy, like showing when to operate, how to operate, whether to go anterior and posterior. But there was no any research correlating cervical myelopathy and the mean arterial pressure. This led us to investigate the role played by elevating the MAP during surgery for cervical myelopathy. The study design, it was a prospective randomized pilot study conducted at a tertiary spine center in Mumbai over a period of 18 months. With the prior institutional approval, ethics committee approval was taken. A total of 84 patients were enrolled in the study as per the inclusion and the exclusion criteria. This is a flow diagram so showing the randomization of 84 patients were done into the normotensive and the hypertensive group, and they were followed up and analyzed. These are some of the case example when we have operated, showing the anterior as well as the posterior surgery and their pre-operative and the post-operative MRIs. In results, the most common affected level in both the hypertensive and the normotensive group was C5, C6 followed by C6, C7. The intraoperative MAP in the hypertensive group was around 108, and in the normotensive group it was around 94, and the difference was statistically significant. The neurological improvement was documented in 63% with the patients of the hypertensive group as compared to the 53% patients of the normotensive group. Improvement in the MGO score was better for the hypertensive group during the 1 year follow-up, although this difference was statistically not significant. The improvement in VAS score was comparable between the two groups, but at the 1 year follow-up, the VAS score of the hypertensive group was significantly lower compared to the normotensive group. Let's come to discussion part. In our study, the majority of the patients in the hypertensive group had a pre-operative increased signal intensity grading, that is for the chord changes. It was 2 or 3, like it's 60%, whereas most of the patients in the normotensive group were presented with the ISI grade of 1 finding, suggesting comparatively worse and the chronic compression in the hypertensive group as compared to the other. And it was also supported by the significantly longer duration of the symptoms in the hypertensive group. In contrast, the 1 year post-operative MRI demonstrated the ISI grade 1 in 66% in both the groups, in both groups of the patient, and suggesting better outcome in the hypertensive group. We maintained the MAPs of the patients with respect to their pre-operative measurements without sticking to a fixed cutoff, thus making the target MAP specific to each patient. Thus, we recommend, based on our findings, to maintain the intraoperatively MAP slightly higher than the mean pre-operative MAP of the patient. The limitations of our study, it was a single center analysis with relatively small sample size, and corresponding Asia motor score was not part of this study. We can expand this study and analyze the role played by the intraoperative MAP in the other spine pathology. So in conclusion, based on the study of the effect of the intraoperative MAP on the functional outcome of the patients operated for cervical spondylotic myelopathy, we conclude that MAP intraoperatively should be individualized according to the pre-operative average blood pressure assessment of the patient, and keeping the intraoperative MAP at a higher level, that is pre-operative MAP plus 20 millimeters of mercury pressure during the surgery while operating for the cervical spondylotic myelopathy, whether anterior or posterior, can result in a better neurological improvement. But what are the practical applications of our study? Like, the blood pressure is the only factor that can be, is the one factor that can be easily controlled and monitored. It requires no any additional cost. What you require is just a good communication with your anesthesia team. Hence, we believe that the changes suggested in our study can be widely adopted in all kinds of practice settings. Thank you.